John handed me a business card across the kitchen table, an actual business card for a divorce lawyer. He smirked as he did it, as if this entire situation was some sort of game to him. Emily stood beside him, her arm casually draped around his shoulders, like she had already claimed her prize. They were amused, grinning like children who had gotten away with something terrible. I sat there stunned, the weight of years crashing down on me in that moment. No explanation, no apology, just a card and a smug joke about alimony. That moment shattered something inside me. I had spent years believing in the strength of our marriage, in our shared history, and in the belief that we were better than whatever difficulties life threw at us. But John had already moved on, both physically and emotionally. Emily, who had once been my close friend, was now the woman standing beside him, ready to take my place. The betrayal ran deeper than anything I'd ever known. I felt broken, yes, but I wasn't going to stay that way. Something fierce stirred within me, a need not just to heal, but to make them feel what I had felt. Not out of cruelty, but out of justice. If they had torn apart my life without a second thought, they needed to understand what that kind of sorrow really felt like. I didn't want revenge to destroy them. I wanted it to teach them. I made up my mind that once the divorce was finalized, I would set my plan in motion. Quietly. Carefully. I'm 47 years old, a children's book illustrator and author. I've always lived a quiet, artistic life, mostly tucked away behind drawings and stories. John and I had been together for decades. We met right after high school. He confessed he'd always had a thing for me, even when we were just friends, even when I was dating someone else. I was flattered, and I believed in him. Back then, he was charming and kind. We got married, even though I always had my doubts about Emily, my best friend at the time. She had a manipulative edge to her, a way of making everything about herself. But I kept the peace, thinking she'd never really pose a threat. That changed drastically a few years ago when Emily announced she was pregnant. John became oddly invested in her well-being, more than what seemed normal. He started spending more time at her house, under the guise of helping out. He missed dinners, skipped anniversaries, and became irritable over the smallest things. The warmth in our marriage began to fade. Arguments became more frequent, and the intimacy we once shared disappeared almost entirely. I asked him directly several times if something was going on, but he always deflected with vague answers or accusations about me being paranoid. But I wasn't imagining it. I started noticing more inconsistencies, things that didn't add up. It wasn't just about John anymore. Emily was lying to her own husband, George, as well. I found out she had been skipping Emma's school events and telling George false stories about why. I began to connect the dots, slowly and painfully. My world wasn't just crumbling. It had been built on lies for some time. One night, after a particularly brutal argument with John, I called George. We hadn't spoken much over the years, but he answered. Hesitantly, I told him what I had seen and what I suspected. There was silence on the other end before he whispered, "I've had my suspicions too." From that point forward, we began to work together, not out of anger, but from a shared pain and understanding. We didn't want revenge that would hurt Emma, so we agreed to wait. She deserved her innocence. When she turned 18, we'd act. Until then, we'd gather evidence and support each other quietly. Then, life threw me another curveball. I was diagnosed with a serious health issue that required long-term hospitalization. It felt like I was being punished for something I hadn't done. As I lay in sterile rooms with beeping monitors and fluorescent lights, John's visits became less and less frequent. Eventually, he stopped showing up at all. I was left alone, not just physically, but emotionally. He had made his choice, and it wasn't me. When the divorce was finalized, I was no longer the woman begging for answers. I had become someone stronger, someone ready to move on. John looked surprised when I signed the papers without hesitation. Maybe he had expected tears or a last-minute plea. Instead, I gave him the same cold indifference he had shown me months earlier. What he didn't know was that I no longer needed him. My illustration career took off during that time. I started receiving more commissions and signed 2 major publishing contracts. My income grew steadily. I poured my grief into my work, drawing stories that helped children feel safe and loved, something I was rediscovering for myself. Meanwhile, John was struggling. The financial comfort he had once enjoyed with me began to slip through his fingers. Emily, without George's steady support, was also struggling to make ends meet. Their picture-perfect future had started to crack. I decided to visit John's parents to explain the situation before they heard twisted versions of it. Sitting in their living room, I told them everything, gently but truthfully. They had always liked me, and it showed in their shocked and saddened expressions. I didn't expect them to take sides, but I wanted them to know the truth. Then came a moment that I didn't expect. During a heated confrontation, Emily tried to claim a maternal role over Emma. But Emma looked her in the eye and said, "You may have given birth to me, but Sarah is the one who raised me." My heart swelled. All those years of putting Emma first, of protecting her, guiding her, loving her, they mattered. She saw me. She chose me. While John's professional life collapsed, he lost his job, and Emily's ventures kept failing, I quietly kept building mine. I wasn't flaunting success, but I wasn't hiding it either. I just kept working, healing, and rebuilding my world from the ground up. Through it all, George remained by my side. We never rushed into anything romantic. It was more important that we both recovered. But over time, something unspoken began to grow. A tenderness. A hope. As my health improved, we started spending more time together. Walks in the park. Conversations over coffee. Gentle laughter that didn't come with tension or guilt. I began to imagine a future with him. Not one defined by betrayal or pain, but by companionship and genuine love. Today, I still write and illustrate children's books. My studio is filled with light, sketches, and stories. Emma visits often, and she calls me Mom like she always has. George and I continue to share quiet, meaningful moments, unspoken promises of what could be. I've learned that life doesn't always give us what we expect, but it often gives us what we need, eventually. And now, I'm ready for joy. Real, honest joy. Not as revenge, but as rebirth. Some days, I still wake up with a heaviness in my chest, a shadow from the past that lingers quietly. But I've learned not to fear it. Pain doesn't vanish, it softens. It teaches you what you can survive and who you truly are when everything falls apart. I used to wonder if I had done something wrong, if I had missed a sign, or if I simply wasn't enough. But over time, I realized that their betrayal was never about me. It was about their own weaknesses, their selfishness, their inability to appreciate loyalty and love when it stood right in front of them. I stopped looking for closure from John. He never apologized, never owned up to what he had done. And that's fine now. I don't need his remorse to move on. What I have instead is a life that's mine again, one built not on compromise and silence, but on choice and truth. Emma went off to college a year ago. She chose a university close enough to visit often, and she still calls me every few days, sometimes just to chat, sometimes just to say, "I love you." That means more to me than anything John or Emily could ever say. Raising her was never part of a plan, it just happened. But it became the greatest gift of my life. George and I didn't jump into anything. We remained friends for a long while after everything settled. We helped each other heal, not by rushing into love, but by listening, supporting, and showing up. Eventually, we started going out for quiet dinners, taking weekend trips, and laughing like we used to, back before our lives were flipped upside down. There's a deep kind of comfort that comes from being with someone who truly understands what you've been through. George never made me feel like I needed to be anything other than myself, and in his presence, I finally felt safe. We never tried to recreate what we had lost. Instead, we built something new, something grounded and real. There were no grand declarations or fairy tale gestures, just steady, honest love, the kind that grows stronger over time. One spring morning, George brought me a cup of coffee while I was sketching in my studio. He kissed my forehead and said, "You know, I never thought I'd find peace again. But with you, I feel like I've come home." I didn't say anything right away. I just reached for his hand and held it tightly, knowing that this this quiet, ordinary moment, meant everything. Eventually, we moved in together, choosing a house near the woods, where the mornings are filled with birdsong and the evenings glow with soft golden light. I turned one of the rooms into a bigger studio, and George started writing again. He used to love it, and now he does it for joy, not deadlines. We spend our days doing what we love, and our nights talking, reading, or simply being together. I no longer feel the need to make John and Emily suffer. Life has already taught them their own lessons, I'm sure. They chose each other, and with that came consequences. I don't keep tabs on them anymore. I don't care what they're doing or where they ended up. That chapter of my life is closed. What matters now is the life I've built, the one that rose from the ashes of heartbreak, the one that is mine entirely. And as I sit by the window in my studio, watching the trees sway gently outside and hearing George hum a tune in the kitchen, I know I made it through. Not just survived, but truly lived. Because love isn't about who starts the story with you. It's about who stays when everything falls apart and who helps you build it back up again, stronger than before.